right now, wherever you are, whatever you're doing with your life, you are operating at about 40% of what you're actually capable of. You don't believe that. Nobody does. But a man who ran 100 miles with zero training, survived 3 Navy SEAL Hell Weeks in a single year, and broke a world record with his hands literally shredded to the bone, he proved it. David Goggins grew up beaten, starved of love, and written off by the world. He was 297 pounds with no future and no purpose. Then one day, he looked in the mirror and declared war on himself. "Can't hurt me" is the story of that war. And by the end, you will never look at your own limits the same way again. Have you ever felt like your life was already decided for you? Like the hand you were dealt at birth was so bad that no amount of effort could ever change the outcome? Most of us have felt that at some point, and most of us, if we're being honest, let that feeling win. David Goggins refused. He was born into violence, raised in poverty, failed in school, failed in the military. He was obese, divorced, broke, and working a dead-end job spraying poison in restaurant kitchens at 2 in the morning. By every measure that matters, he should have been a statistic, another life swallowed by the system. Instead, he became a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, an ultra-marathon champion, a world record holder, and one of the most respected voices on mental toughness alive today. But this is not a highlight reel. Can't Hurt Me is the full, uncut, brutally honest story of how one man dismantled himself and built something harder from the wreckage. Over the next hour, I'll walk you through every key idea, every breakthrough, every moment of suffering that turned David Goggins from the weakest person he knew into the hardest man he'd ever met. And along the way, he's going to challenge you, not with empty motivation, not with feel-good affirmations, with real, uncomfortable assignments designed to force you to look at your own life the way he looked at his. So if you're ready, let's start where David's story begins. Not in a gym, not on a battlefield, but in a beautiful house, on a quiet street, in a neighborhood called Paradise, where the Goggins family found hell. Chapter 1. I should have been a statistic. In 1981, Williamsville was the prettiest neighborhood in Buffalo, New York. Leafy streets, dainty homes, doctors and lawyers and football players living out the American dream with their families. And right there on the corner of Paradise Road sat the Goggins house. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, white columns framing a wide front porch, a vegetable garden out back, a Rolls-Royce in the garage next to a Mercedes, and a brand new black Corvette. From the outside, the Goggins family looked like they were at the very top of the food chain. But glossy surfaces reflect much more than they reveal. Every weekday morning, the neighbors would see Toughness Goggins in the driveway around 7, handsome, built like a boxer, tailored suit, warm smile. His wife Jackie was 17 years younger, slender and beautiful. Their 2 boys were clean-cut and well-dressed. It looked like any other family heading off to work and school. What the neighbors didn't know was that the Goggins family had just returned from another all-night shift in the hood. And if Paradise Road was hell, then David's father was the devil himself. As soon as the neighbors shut their doors, Toughness's smile disappeared. He barked orders and went inside to sleep off whatever he'd been drinking. But for young David and his brother, the work wasn't done. Their mother had to get them to school, and David was only 6 years old. Now think about what first grade is supposed to look like. You're learning to read. You're making friends. You're soaking up the world like a sponge. David couldn't do any of that because David worked nights. His father owned Scatland, one of Buffalo's first roller skating rinks, and a bar upstairs called the Vermilion Room. In the inner city, on a street called Ferry, the building stretched nearly a full block, and every single night, the entire Goggins family worked that operation. David was 6 years old, and he ran the skate rental station by himself. He stood on a step stool just so customers could see him over the counter. He sprayed each pair of skates with aerosol deodorizer that burned his eyes and lived in his nostrils for hours. He replaced rubber stoppers. He polished the rink floor with a dust mop twice his size. His older brother Toughness Jr. worked the concession stand, popping corn and grilling hot dogs. Their mother handled the register, and all the money, every single dollar, went to Toughness Sr. Jackie never earned a cent for her work. She had no bank account, no credit cards in her name. He controlled everything. Around 6 each evening, Jackie would set out 2 electric burners on the floor of the back office and cook a full dinner for the family. Roast meat, potatoes, green beans. She was grasping at any shred of normalcy she could find. But everyone ate fast, because when the doors opened at 7, it was showtime. Toughness would step into the DJ booth, spinning funk and early hip-hop, and he had eyes on every corner of that building. If you messed up, you heard about it. Unless you felt it first. The rink attracted hundreds of people every night. Families, kids, speed skaters. Rick James used to park his Excalibur on the sidewalk out front whenever he was in town. O.J. Simpson and his Buffalo Bills teammates were regulars. On the surface, Skateland was a family-owned dream, a place of joy. Nobody who walked through those doors had any idea what happened after closing time. At 10 o'clock, the rink shut down. That's when the real work started. David, his brother, and their mother would fish bloody tampons out of toilets, scrape gum off the rink floor, clean the concession kitchen, and take inventory. Just before midnight, their mother would tuck the 2 boys under a blanket on the office sofa, heads at opposite ends, while the ceiling shook with bass from the bar upstairs. Then Toughness would put Jackie back to work, hauling cases of liquor from the basement, working the door, whatever menial task he could think of. He watched her from his corner of the bar like a man who owned a thing, not a man who loved a person. And when she didn't move fast enough, or when she looked at him the wrong way, or when she found him with one of the women he ran across the border to Canada for his side businesses, he beat her. One night, Jackie walked into the bar earlier than expected and found Toughness sweet-talking a younger woman. She knew who the woman was. She'd seen her before. Once, she'd walked in on them together on the same sofa where her children slept. When Jackie saw them this time, she slugged 2 shots of scotch to calm her nerves. That was a mistake. Around midnight, after the bank deposit, after the boys were asleep on that sofa, Toughness followed Jackie into their bedroom on Paradise Road. He was holding his leather belt. "This belt came all the way from Texas just to whip you," he said. Then he started swinging. "Buckle first." Jackie fought back that night. She threw a marble candlestick at his head. He ducked. She ran to the bathroom, locked the door. He kicked it down, backhanded her so hard her head hit the wall. She was barely conscious when he grabbed a fistful of her hair and dragged her down the stairs to the first floor. And that's when a 6-year-old boy, shaking with rage, ran downstairs and jumped on his father's back. David slammed his tiny fists into Toughness's back, scratched at his eyes. He caught him off guard, and the man fell to one knee. "Don't hit my mom," David yelled. Toughness tossed the boy to the ground, looked at him, looked at Jackie bleeding from the temple. "You're raising a gangster," he said with half a smile. Then he started swinging his belt at his 6-year-old son. "Now I want you to sit with that for a moment, because this is not the kind of story most people ever have to tell about their childhood. This was David Goggins' normal. Night after night, year after year. The beatings, the control, the guns hidden under sofa cushions where children slept, the protocol for when it was time for a serious punishment. Go to the bedroom, take off your clothes, lie across the bed in the dark with your legs dangling and wait. You couldn't see the door behind you. You never knew when the first blow was coming, or when it would stop. There was no count, no rules, just pain that went on and on until Toughness was breathless. After one beating so severe that welts covered David's body from his neck to the backs of his knees, he didn't go to school for days. And here's the thing. The police came to that house. They saw Jackie standing behind Toughness with a swollen face caked in dried blood, and they did nothing. Toughness told them it was just domestic discipline. They chuckled, walked him to their car, and drove away. David says that young kids, no matter who their parents are born with a moral compass that's properly tuned. When you're 6 or 7 years old, you know what feels right and what feels wrong. And when you are born into a cyclone of terror and pain, you know it doesn't have to be that way. But knowing doesn't mean you can escape it. David's mother planned her exit for weeks. An older neighbor named Betty coached her through every step. Jackie had to play Toughness treat him like she worshipped him again, just long enough for him to co-sign a credit card application. When that card arrived in the mail, Jackie held it at arm's length and admired it. It glowed like a golden ticket. A few days later, she sat down at the kitchen table with her sons and said 5 words that changed everything. "I'm leaving your father. You two can stay, or you can come with me." David shot out of that chair like it was on fire, grabbed garbage bags, and went upstairs to start packing. Toughness glared at them from across the table. He told Jackie she had nothing and was nothing without him, that she was uneducated, that she'd be a prostitute inside a year, that his boys would grow up to be failures. Jackie nodded. She left the mink coats. She left the diamond rings. She packed her sons and their bicycles into the one car Toughness wouldn't be caught dead riding in, an old Volvo, and drove off Paradise Road. The Volvo started burning oil 90 miles outside of Buffalo. Jackie pulled into a gas station hysterical. David's brother wanted to go back. Jackie looked at David in the passenger seat. "What do I do?" "We gotta go, Mom," he said. He was 8 years old. "Mom, we gotta go." They made it to a Holiday Inn in Erie, Pennsylvania that was fully booked. The night manager saw a desperate woman and 2 children holding their belongings in black trash bags. He set them up with rollaway beds in a conference room. They slept on industrial carpet under fluorescent lights. The next day, a Volvo dealership fixed the car just in time. They drove through the night and arrived at David's grandparents' house in Brazil, Indiana, just before dawn. David was still only 8 years old, but already he was living a second life. He didn't know what waited for him in that small, rural Indiana town. He didn't much care. All he knew was they had escaped from hell, and for the first time in his life, they were free from the devil himself. Chapter 2. Truth Hurts. Brazil, Indiana was a small town. Population around 8,000. Quiet streets, country roads, about as far from Buffalo as you could get in every possible way. David enrolled in 2nd grade for the second time at a local Catholic school called Annunciation. He was the only 8-year-old in 2nd grade, but none of the other kids knew he was repeating a year, and he desperately needed to. He could barely read, but David got lucky. His teacher was a 60-year-old nun named Sister Catherine. Short, petite, 1 gold front tooth, grumpy as hell, and took no nonsense from anyone. She wasn't the type to label a struggling kid and ship him off to a specialist. She came from a generation that didn't believe in excuses. All she knew was that a boy showed up at her door with a kindergarten education, and it was her job to fix that. And here's what made Sister Catherine special. She figured out that David needed repetition, that he had to solve the same problems over and over again in different ways to learn. She knew that took time, and she gave him that time. She stayed after class, she worked with him one-on-one, and before the year was out, David could read at a 2nd grade level. David says Sister Catherine is the reason he'll never trust a smile or judge a scowl. His father smiled all the time and didn't give a damn about him, but grouchy Sister Catherine, with her gold tooth and her no-nonsense attitude, she actually cared. Meanwhile, David's mother was rebuilding her life from nothing. They moved into a 600-square-foot apartment in public housing that cost $7 a month. Toughness Sr., who made thousands every night, sporadically sent $25 for child support every few weeks. If that. Jackie worked at a department store, took night classes at Indiana State University, and enrolled in welfare. She received $123 a month plus food stamps. David vividly remembers one night when they drove home on an almost empty gas tank, to a bare refrigerator and a past-due electric bill, with no money in the bank. Then he remembered 2 mason jars filled with pennies and loose change sitting on a shelf. "Mom, let's count our change." They dumped those coins on the living room floor and counted out enough to cover the electric bill, fill the gas tank, buy groceries, and even grab burgers at Hardee's on the way home. Think about that. A woman who once lived surrounded by Rolls Royces and mink coats, now counting pennies on a living room floor with her 8-year-old son. And somehow, they were happier because they were free. But freedom doesn't erase trauma. It just gives it room to breathe. 3rd grade was a shock. David's new teacher, Miss D, was nothing like Sister Catherine. Where the nun saw a boy who needed more time, Miss D saw a problem she wanted out of her classroom. Within the first month, she told David's mother he belonged in a school for special students. Every kid knows what special means. It means you are about to be stigmatized for the rest of your life. The threat triggered something in David. Almost overnight, he developed a stutter. His thought-to-speech connection jammed with stress and anxiety. Imagine being the only black kid in the entire school, already feeling like the dumbest one in the room, and now every time a teacher calls your name, your mouth betrays you. Ms. D didn't empathize. She yelled at him. Sometimes she'd lean down, her face inches from his, and shout. School had once been David's safe harbor, the one place his father couldn't reach him. Now it had become its own kind of torture. The administration put David in group therapy with a psychologist. The other kids in the group were wearing helmets and banging their heads against walls. One of them had set his own house on fire. David sat there on his first day, staring at the shrink, thinking, there is no way I belong here. His hair started falling out. White splotches bloomed on his dark skin. The doctor diagnosed him with ADHD and prescribed Ritalin, but David's real condition was something much deeper. He was suffering from toxic stress. The kind of abuse he'd experienced had rewired his developing brain. It put him in a permanent state of fight or flight, which limited his language development, his memory, and his ability to retain anything he'd learned from one day to the next. His mother pulled him out of therapy after 2 sessions. He never took the Ritalin. But the damage was already done, and David found his own solution to survive school. He started cheating, and he got very, very good at it. He copied friends' homework. He scanned neighbors' work during tests. He even copied answers on standardized tests that didn't affect his grades. His rising scores kept Miss D quiet, and his mother stopped getting calls from school. David thought he'd solved a problem. What he'd really done was guarantee that he would never actually learn anything. Then Wilmoth Irving walked into their lives. David's mother met Wilmoth when David was in 4th grade. He was a successful carpenter and general contractor from Indianapolis. Easy smile, laid-back style, no violence in him. He gave them permission to exhale for the first time in years. David's mother laughed when they were together. She stood up straighter. As for David, Wilmoth became the closest thing to a real father he'd ever known. He didn't coddle the boy. He didn't say sappy things, but he was there. They played basketball together, celebrated birthdays and holidays, and the summer before 8th grade, Wilmoth got down on one knee and asked David's mother to marry him. The day after Christmas, 1989, Wilmoth drove to Indianapolis for a men's league basketball game. He'd invited David to come along, but at the last minute told him to stay behind. I'm gonna keep you back here this time, little David, he said. Your mom is gonna drive up in a few days and we can play ball then. David watched from the porch as Wilmoth backed out of the carport, smiled, and gave that crisp single wave of his. It was the last time they would ever see him alive. Wilmoth played his basketball game that night and drove home alone. Killers had been staking out his house for hours. As he climbed out of his car in the garage, they stepped from the shadows and fired from close range. 5 shots to the chest. When he dropped to the floor, the gunman stepped over him and delivered a kill shot right between his eyes. Wilmoth was 43 years old. David's grandmother broke the news. David thought about his mother. Wilmoth had been her savior. She'd been opening up, ready to believe in good things again. What would this do to her? His rage overwhelmed him. He broke free of his grandmother's arms, punched the refrigerator, and left a dent. That night, while his mother was still in shock, 14-year-old David was left alone in a back bedroom at Wilmoth's sister's house. The television was on the local news, and they kept running the same footage on a loop. David and his mother ducking under police tape, Wilmoth's body being wheeled on a gurney under a white sheet. He sat there all night, watching the same footage over and over. Each time he watched, his fear grew until it filled the room, and still he could not stop. Something else resurfaced that week, a memory David had buried for a year. During the previous school year, he'd been sitting on a bus waiting to pull away from the curb when a little boy ran toward them carrying a tray of cookies for the driver. The driver didn't see him. The bus jerked forward. David saw the mother's face before he heard the sound. She howled and tore the hair from her own head. The boy was about 6 years old. David looked under the bus and saw him. What he saw he would never forget. Wilmoth's death reawakened that image, and now it was all David could think about. He was beyond the pale. Nothing mattered to him anymore. He'd seen enough to know that the world was filled with tragedy and that it would just keep piling up until it swallowed him. David couldn't sleep in a bed anymore. Neither could his mother. She slept in an armchair with the television on. David would try to curl up in bed at night, but always woke in the fetal position on the floor. Eventually he gave in and just slept there. Maybe, he thought, because if he could find comfort at the bottom, there would be no more falling. They made the move to Indianapolis anyway, without Wilmoth, but because they needed the fresh start. David cheated his way into Cathedral High School, a private college prep academy, off the test scores of a smart kid sitting next to him. His acceptance letter came with a full slate of AP classes. He hacked his way through, cheating and copying. He made the freshman basketball team, which was one of the best in the state, and started at point guard. That was a real achievement, but David couldn't build on it because he knew, deep down, he was an academic fraud. After 1 year, his mother couldn't afford the tuition. He transferred to a public school, and a few months later was back in Brazil. Back in the town where he was the only black kid. Back where people had already decided who he was. And this time, the racism wasn't subtle. Not long after moving back, David and his cousin Damien were walking down a country road when a pickup truck slowed alongside them. A scruffy-looking teenager leaned out the window and yelled the word. Then the passenger got out of the cab with a pistol. He aimed it at David's head and walked right up to him. "Where are you from? And why are you in this town?" David locked eyes with the gunman and said nothing. After a few seconds, the man got back in the truck and sped off. Another time, David was in a Pizza Hut with his friend Johnny and a girl named Pam. When Pam's father arrived and saw his daughter sitting with David, he burst into the packed restaurant and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't want to ever see you sitting with this," and he said the word. David sat there, paralyzed, staring at the floor. It was the most humiliating moment of his life. Not because of the word itself. He'd heard it before, but because it happened in public, from a grown man, and it made David wonder how many other people in that town felt exactly the same way when they saw him walking down the street. Someone drew a picture of David in a noose in his Spanish workbook. Below it, the words, "We're gonna kill you." They'd misspelled the slur, but they'd made their point. David took the notebook to the principal. The man examined it for a long time. Then he looked up and said the only thing he could think of, "David, this is sheer ignorance. They don't even know how to spell it." His life had been threatened, and that was the best anyone could do. David withdrew. He fell into black nationalism. He watched Malcolm X speeches every day after school. He started dressing to provoke, sagging his pants, blasting hip-hop from oversized speakers in the trunk of his car, coming up with new hairstyles specifically designed to make racists uncomfortable. But if you'd bothered to drill down a little deeper, you'd have seen the truth. David wasn't about anything. Everything he did was to get a reaction out of the people who hated him, because everyone's opinion mattered to him. And that's a shallow way to live. He was full of pain, had no real purpose, and looked like he was heading for disaster. But he hadn't let go of all hope. He had one dream left. He wanted to join the Air Force, the accountability mirror. David's grandfather had served 37 years as a cook in the Air Force, and was so proud of his service that even after retiring, he'd wear his dress uniform to church on Sundays. That level of pride inspired David to dream of military life. Through the Civil Air Patrol, he discovered a job called pararescue, the elite airmen who jump out of airplanes to pull downed pilots out of harm's way. David had found his dream. But dreams and reality are two very different things, and reality was about to hit him like a truck. During his junior year, David took the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, the ASVAB. It's the military's version of the SATs. David showed up fully prepared to do what he always did, cheat. But when he sat down, he discovered the person to his left and the person to his right had completely different tests. For the first time in his life, he had to go it alone. He scored a 20 out of 99. The minimum to get into the Air Force was 36. He couldn't even get close. Then, just before summer break, a letter arrived from his high school. David had missed over a quarter of the year due to unexcused absences. His GPA was a D average. Unless he showed significant improvement in his senior year, he would not graduate. His mother read him the letter over the phone. She wasn't emotional. She was exhausted. "I just wanted you to know you were flunking out." David came home later that day with his stomach growling. She didn't demand an apology. He didn't ask for forgiveness. She just left the door open, walked away, and he made himself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That night, after a shower, David wiped the steam from their old bathroom mirror and took a good, hard look at what stared back at him. He didn't like what he saw. He saw a low-budget thug with no purpose and no future. He felt so disgusted he wanted to punch the glass. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He started talking to himself, not gently, not with kindness, with the raw, brutal honesty of a man who had run completely out of options. "Look at you," he said to that mirror. "Why do you think the Air Force wants your punk behind? You stand for nothing. You are an embarrassment." He reached for the shaving cream, smoothed a thin coat over his face, unwrapped a fresh razor, and kept talking. "You are one dumb individual. You read like a third grader. You're a joke. You've never tried hard at anything in your life besides basketball, and you have goals? That's hilarious." He shaved his cheeks, then lathered his scalp. He was desperate for a change. "You don't see people in the military sagging their pants. No more taking the easy way out. It's time to grow up." Steam rippled off his skin and poured from his soul. What started as a venting session had become a solo intervention. "It's on you," he said. "Yeah, I know life is messed up. I know what you've been through. I was there. Nobody is coming to save you. Not your mommy, not Wilmoth, nobody. It's up to you." By the time he was done, he was shaved clean. Water purled on his scalp and dripped down the bridge of his nose. He looked different, and for the first time in his life, he'd held himself accountable. A new ritual was born that night, one that David would repeat every single day. He'd shave his face and his scalp, get loud, get real, and stare into what he now calls the accountability mirror. He set goals, wrote them on sticky notes, and posted them right there on the glass. Every morning, every night, he held himself accountable to those goals. At first, they were simple. Make your bed like you're in the military. Pull up your pants, shave your head, cut the grass, wash the dishes. It doesn't sound like much, but for a kid who had never taken ownership of a single thing in his life, it was revolutionary. The morning after that first session with the mirror, David trashed the fuzzy dice hanging from his rearview mirror and the shag carpet covers on his steering wheel. He tucked his shirt in, he wore a belt, and when school started, he stopped eating lunch at his usual table with the popular kids. For the first time, being liked and acting cool were a waste of his time. He found his own table and ate alone. Now let me be clear about something. This was not some instant transformation. David didn't become a different person overnight. What changed was his relationship with the truth. He stopped lying to himself. He stopped pretending things were fine. And once he could see himself clearly, he could start doing the work. During his senior year, David woke up before dawn and hit the YMCA by 5 every morning. He ran constantly, usually around the local golf course after dark. One night he ran 13 miles, the most he'd ever run. And here's where it gets interesting. His route took him to a familiar intersection. The same street where that redneck had pointed a gun at his head. David stopped and stared down that road. His heart was hammering. He was terrified, which is exactly why he turned around and started running straight down it. Within seconds, 2 snarling dogs got loose and chased him. The woods leaned in on both sides. He kept expecting that pickup truck to appear and run him down, but he kept running, faster and faster, until the dogs gave up and the road went quiet. By the time he turned back, his fear was gone. He owned that street. From that point on, David brainwashed himself into craving discomfort. If it was raining, he went for a run. If it was snowing, he laced up his shoes even faster. Whenever he wussed out, he dealt with it at the accountability mirror, and facing that mirror, facing himself, motivated him to push through the next uncomfortable thing, and the next. But nothing was as hard as learning. The kitchen table became David's all-day, all-night study hall. After failing the ASVAB a second time, his mother found him a tutor who helped him discover a system, memorization through transcription. He couldn't just read a textbook and remember it. He had to write out every page in longhand, then do it again and again, 3 times through before anything stuck. It was brutal. It was slow. If his tutor spent an hour teaching a lesson, David needed 6 more hours to lock it in. But he did the work. He made flashcards by the thousands. He wrote out formulas until his hand cramped, and the goals on his accountability mirror shifted from household chores to academic milestones. Over 6 months, David went from a 4th grade reading level to that of a high school senior. His vocabulary exploded. He developed an obsession for learning that he'd never known existed inside him, and the resentment he'd carried toward the racists in Brazil, it started to dissolve. Not because they changed, because David finally considered the source. He looked at the people who were making him feel small and realized how uncomfortable they were in their own skin. To bully someone you don't even know, based on race alone, is a clear sign that something is broken inside you, not the person you're targeting. When you have no confidence, it's easy to value everyone's opinion. David had been valuing the opinions of people without ever considering the minds that produced them. Once he made that connection, being angry at them wasn't worth his time because he had too much work to do. David passed the ASVAB on his 3rd try. He graduated high school. He enlisted in the Air Force with dreams of becoming a pararescue jumper. But here's what David would learn next. Confidence built from the accountability mirror, from hard work and self-discipline, is real, but it can also be fragile, especially when you're carrying wounds you haven't fully healed, because your past, your deepest fears, have a way of going dormant before springing back to life at double strength. David had escaped Brazil, but he hadn't escaped himself. The Air Force would reveal something he didn't want to face. He was still soft inside. He was still insecure. And that's when the real war began. Chapter 3. The Impossible Task. It was past midnight, and the streets were dead. David Goggins steered his pickup truck into another empty parking lot and killed the engine. In the quiet, all he could hear was the hum of Halligan's street lamps and the scratch of his pen as he checked off another restaurant on his list. He was an exterminator for Ecolab. His job was to show up at restaurants after hours, bait rat traps, spray cockroach poison, and bag dead rodents stuck to sticky traps. He had keys and alarm codes to nearly every restaurant in his part of Indianapolis. He worked alone, in the dark, every single night, and he weighed nearly 300 pounds. This was not the life David had signed up for when he enlisted in the Air Force with dreams of becoming a pararescue jumper. Back then, he was 19, weighed 175 pounds, and was full of purpose. He shipped off to boot camp, thrived in his new flight, and started pararescue training as one of the best candidates in his class. But pararescue training had a component nobody warned him about: water confidence. That's a polite name for a course where they try to drown you for weeks. And David was uncomfortable in the water. He'd never had swim lessons. The first time he ever swam was at Boy Scout camp, where he dog paddled and improvised a backstroke just to survive a 1-mile lake swim. In training, they had to walk backward into the deep end of a pool, wearing twin 80-pound steel tanks and a 16-pound weight belt. No breathing from the tanks, just push off the bottom, get a gulp of air at the surface, and sink back down. David was negatively buoyant, meaning when he stopped swimming, he sank. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, every cell in his body screamed for air, while his classmates floated nearby, calm as can be. Every night before a water evolution, David couldn't sleep. Fear and rage thrummed through his veins. The quitting mind started to build, and 6 weeks into training, during a buddy breathing exercise where he was dragging his partner underwater because he couldn't stay near the surface, the instructors pulled him aside. They discovered he carried the sickle cell trait, not the disease, but the trait, which was believed to increase the risk of sudden cardiac arrest during extreme exercise. The Air Force pulled him out of training on a medical. David pretended to take the news hard. He made a big show of being angry. He acted like his dream was being ripped away, but inside he was ecstatic. He was relieved, because the truth was, he wanted out. He was terrified of the water, and the sickle cell diagnosis gave him a clean exit that didn't look like quitting. A week later, the doctors reversed their decision. They said the trait wasn't well understood and left it up to David. If he wanted to continue, he could, but because he'd missed so much time, he'd have to start over from day one, week one, another 10 weeks of the terror, the rage, the insomnia. David looked at the master sergeant and said, "You know what? The doctor doesn't know much about this sickle cell thing, and it's bothering me." The master sergeant signed the papers. On paper, David didn't quit. The file said sickle cell, but David knew the truth. If he'd been the man he would later become, he wouldn't have cared about sickle cell. He still has the trait to this day. You don't just get rid of it. But back then, an obstacle appeared, and he folded. David moved to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He told everyone he was forced out on a medical. He served out his 4 years in a tactical air control unit. Good work with smart people. But he was never proud of it because he knew what he really was, a quitter who had let fear dictate his future. And he buried that shame the way a lot of people do. He ate, and he ate. He got into powerlifting and layered en masse. By his last days in the Air Force, he weighed 255 pounds. After his discharge, he kept going. He ate and lifted and ate, until he hit nearly 300 pounds. He wanted to be big, because being big hid who he really was. He could tuck the scared, 175-pound person deep inside those 21-inch biceps and that flabby belly. He grew a burly mustache. He was intimidating to look at. But inside, he knew the truth, and that's a haunting feeling. After leaving the Air Force, David got a job working hospital security for minimum wage, about $700 a month. One night, an Ecolab truck pulled up and the exterminator mentioned they were hiring. Free truck, no boss looking over your shoulder, 35% pay raise. David didn't think about it. He took what was offered. Path of least resistance. Dominoes falling on his head one after another. And that brings us back to where we started. Nearly 300 pounds. Cockroach duty. Graveyard shift. Married to a woman whose father once called him a racial slur in a Pizza Hut. $60,000 in debt. Living in an apartment he couldn't afford. Existing at the very bottom of the barrel. Then one morning, everything changed. It was 7 in the morning. David's Ecolab shift had just ended. He hit the Steak and Shake drive-thru for a large chocolate milkshake and stopped at 7-Eleven for a box of mini chocolate donuts. He gobbled those on his drive home and walked in the door to a ringing phone. His mother, inviting him over for his staple, 8 Pillsbury cinnamon rolls, a half-dozen scrambled eggs, a half-pound of bacon, and 2 bowls of Fruity Pebbles. On top of the donuts and the milkshake he'd already consumed, he hung up and turned on the television before heading to the shower. Through the steam, he could hear a narrator's voice. Snippets of words. Navy SEALs, toughest in the world. He wrapped a towel around his waist, rushed to the living room, and sat down. The show followed a BODS training class through Hell Week, the most punishing week of the most physically demanding training in the military. David watched men sweat and suffer through muddy obstacle courses, carry logs on the beach, and shiver in freezing surf. He watched the strongest of them crack and ring the bell. Sweat beaded on his scalp. He was on the edge of his seat, and something stirred inside him that hadn't moved in years. These men were everything David wasn't. They were pride and dignity and excellence forged in fire. They weren't motivated. They were driven. And by the time the show ended with graduation, with 22 men standing in their dress whites, David was staring at the television with tears in his eyes. He walked to the bathroom, faced the mirror, and stared at what he saw. 297 pounds. Everything the haters said he would become. Uneducated, no skills, no discipline, dead-end future. Mediocrity would have been a promotion. But for the first time in years, he was awake. For almost 3 weeks, David called Navy recruiting offices all over the country. Everyone turned him down. Too heavy, prior service, not interested. One office agreed to meet him in person, took one look, and laughed in his face. Finally, He reached a reservist recruiter named Stephen Shaljo. Shaljo was one of the finest recruiters in the Navy, and when David walked in, Shaljo didn't blink at his size. He walked David to the scale, 297 pounds. The maximum allowable weight for the Navy at David's height was 191. David had less than 3 months to lose 106 pounds. It sounded impossible. But David didn't quit his job. He had to study for the ASVAB again too, because to qualify for SEAL training, he needed a much higher score than what got him into the Air Force. Here's what a typical day looked like. Wake up at 4:30, eat a banana, hit the ASVAB books. By 5, he was on a stationary bike, sweating and studying for 2 hours. Then he drove to a high school pool and swam for 2 hours. From there, the gym for circuit training focused on high reps, 5 or 6 sets of 100 to 200 reps each, then back to the stationary bike for 2 more hours. Dinner was his one real meal: a grilled chicken breast, some vegetables, and a thimble of rice. After dinner, 2 more hours on the bike, then bed, then he'd wake up and do it all over again. He was constantly hungry. His stomach growled through the night. His mind swirled with ASVAB questions and dread about the next day's workouts. Depression became a natural side effect. His marriage was falling apart, and the voice in his head never stopped asking the same question: who do you think you are? But something remarkable happened. Within 2 weeks, David dropped 25 pounds. The weight started peeling off. By the time he was down to 250, he could do push-ups and pull-ups again. He started running, 2 miles, then 3, then 4. He ditched his running shoes and ordered the same boots SEAL candidates wear and started running in those. And whenever he cut a workout short, whenever he missed a single pull-up or skipped a quarter mile, the guilt ate him alive. One day at the gym, after a pull-up workout, his goal was 12 reps on his max set. He stopped at 11 because the pain was too much. That one rep haunted him all the way home. He drove back to the gym that night and did the entire pull-up workout over again. 250 extra pull-ups because he quit 1 rep short. "There are no shortcuts for you, Goggins," he said out loud behind the wheel. "You cut corners, and you are not going to make it." On the eve of the ASVAB, David had already dropped below 215. He was faster and stronger than he'd ever been. But the test was everything. This was his last chance. If he failed, his eligibility for SEAL training would expire, and the dream would die. He sat down at a computer on Fort Benjamin Harrison. 30 people in the room. He breezed through section after section until he hit mechanical comprehension, his truth serum. The one section he needed to score at least a 50 on, and the one he'd failed before. He guessed on at least 10 of the 30 questions. After finishing, he walked outside. Buzzing with nervous energy, he paced the parking lot, then sat in his car for 15 minutes with a 1,000-yard stare. He couldn't leave. The answer was inside that building. He walked back in and approached the test administrator. "You have to tell me what I got." "I can't do that, son. There's a system." "Sir, you have no idea what this test means to me. It's everything." The administrator looked into David's glassy eyes for a long time. Then he turned to his screen, scrolled through the files, and said, "Congratulations, you scored 65 overall." David didn't care about the overall. Everything came down to one number. What did I get on mechanical comprehension? The administrator clicked, scrolled, and there it was, glowing on the screen. 50. Exactly what he needed. David screamed. He screamed so loud that people still taking the test stared at him like he'd lost his mind. He ran to his car and screamed some more. He called his mother with tears in his eyes. "I did it, Mom. I'm going to be a SEAL." His wife had given him an ultimatum: stay married or go to SEAL training. The decision was easy. David had been a prisoner in his own mind his entire life. This was his only chance to break free. He'd gone from nearly 300 pounds to 215, from a score of 20 on the ASVAB to 65, from a man who couldn't run a quarter mile to someone who ran 6 miles a day and swam 2. In the final weeks before shipping out, David trained in the pool wearing a 16-pound weight belt. He swam underwater for 50 meters at a time. He walked the length of the pool with a brick in each hand on a single breath. The water would not own him this time. Then he waded into a freezing pond near his mother's house in the Indiana December. He lay back in the ice-cold water and looked up at the gray sky. After a few minutes, he climbed out and started running, water sloshing in his boots, sand in his underwear. Within seconds, his shirt was frozen to his chest. He hit the Monon Trail. Steam poured from his nose and mouth. Joggers and speedwalkers stared as he sprinted past them. He ran as fast as he could for as long as he could. From a past that no longer defined him, toward a future undetermined, all he knew was there would be pain, there would be purpose, and that he was ready. Chapter 4. Taking Souls. The first concussion grenade exploded at close range, then another. Suddenly, an instructor they called Psycho Pete was in their faces, screaming at the top of his lungs, his cheeks flushed red, a vein throbbing in his temple. David's boat crew sprinted for the door. Outside, Navy SEALs were firing M60s into the darkness. Orange halos from explosions lit up the night. Every impulse said hit the dirt, but movement was their only option. They gathered on the grinder, that infamous slab of asphalt at the Naval Special Warfare Command Center in Coronado, and waited. Psycho Pete stomped the pocked asphalt, the muzzle of his rifle steaming in the fog. "Welcome to Hell Week, gentlemen," he said, calm this time in his surfer drawl. "It will be my great pleasure to watch you suffer. Now here's something you need to understand. This was not David Goggins' first Hell Week. It was his second. His first time through, he'd been pulled out after contracting double pneumonia. He fought the doctors 3 times to stay in the fight, but they eventually forced him to the barracks. He was rolled back to day 1, week 1 of a brand new class, and his lungs still weren't healed when that new class kicked off. But David liked his chances better this time because he was in a boat crew thick with hard men. In BUDADS, boat crews are sorted by height, because those are the guys you carry your 200-pound inflatable boat with everywhere you go. David's crew was a squad of misfits. There was the late Chris Kyle, who would go on to become the deadliest sniper in Navy history with an $80,000 bounty on his head. Back then, he was a quiet Texas cowboy who barely said a word. And there was Bill Brown, aka Freak Brown, the white version of David Goggins, who grew up marginalized in the river towns of South Jersey, bullied for his cleft palate, spent time in juvenile detention, and taught himself to swim just to pass the SEAL test. He'd already been through Bud// once and flunked out at the very end on a weapons practical. But he came back for another round. David made sure he and Brown were the 2 men at the front of the boat, where it's heaviest. He looked Brown in the eye and said, "We will be the pillars of Boat Crew 2. "Don't call me Freak, Goggins," Brown snarled. "Well, don't you move out of position, son. You and me up front all week." "Roger that." Now, before Hell Week even began, David did something most people would consider insane. He decided his crew needed to steal the Hell Week schedule from the instructors. Think about why. 130 hours of suffering without sleep cannot be broken down into manageable pieces. There's no way to systematically attack it. And that's exactly what breaks people. Not the cold, not the push-ups, not the surf torture. It's the feeling that it will never end, that you have no control. David knew from his first Hell Week that the instructors used suffering to break you mentally, not physically. Hell Week was a mind game, and having their schedule in advance would give Boat Crew 2 a psychological edge before the game even started. It would be their first victory. Kenny Bigby, the only other black man in the class, had access to the instructor's office. That night he slipped in, found the schedule, made a copy, and slipped it back before anyone knew it was gone. Just like that, Boat Crew 2 had stolen fire from the gods. The first hour of Hell Week was actually fun. Adrenaline was flowing. Guys were looking around the grinder thinking, we're actually in Hell Week. But reality kicked in fast. They linked arms and waded into the Pacific. The surf was head high and angry. The water temperature hovered around 60 degrees. Waves thrashed them. Cold shriveled their bodies and swiped the breath from their lungs. They bobbed up and down as one, ducking swells they could barely see in the moonless dark. After 10 minutes, they scrambled to shore, stood at attention, and were checked for hypothermia, then sent back in. Over and over, for hours, the instructors stopped yelling. They didn't need to. The cold did their work for them. Instead, Psycho Pete consoled the class like a concerned older brother. He offered hot soup, warm showers, blankets, a ride back to the barracks, and one by one, men took the bait. They rang the bell 3 times, set their helmets down, and walked away from their dreams. Ask yourself, why? Because every single person who has ever tried to become a SEAL has asked themselves one simple question during their first dose of surf torture. Why am I here? Nobody has to be a SEAL. You're not drafted, it's a choice. And what that question reveals is that every second you remain in training is also a choice, which makes the entire experience feel like masochism, voluntary torture. And that makes no sense to the rational mind. David went into Hell Week knowing he'd put himself there, that he wanted to be there, and he had all the tools he needed to win this mind game. So he played it. During surf torture, while the class stood shivering in the water, David stretched his arms out wide, like Willem Dafoe in that famous scene from Platoon when he's getting gunned down, and he started humming the film's score, loud enough for the instructors to hear over the crashing surf. It drove them crazy, and it fired up his crew. Finding moments of humor in the pain turned the whole experience upside down. It gave Boat Crew 2 something nobody else had, a sense of control. After one round of surf torture, Psycho Pete decided to take the class on a run. It was supposed to be about a mile back to the grinder. Instead, he stretched it to more than 4 miles on soft sand, switching up the cadence constantly, sprinting, then crouching down and doing elephant walks, then jogging, then sprinting again. He was trying to lose them. He did lose them. Every boat crew fell behind, except one. Boat Crew 2 clipped his heels the entire way. They mimicked every step and refused to let him gain a single inch of satisfaction. He smoked everyone else in the class, but he did not smoke Boat Crew 2. By Wednesday, the middle of Hell Week, they were all destroyed. Chafed raw, oozing blood and pus, barely able to lift their boats. Even David's crew was dragging, and David felt it too. His knee was the size of a grapefruit, and every step lit his nerves on fire. But he looked at his crew and saw they were starting to break. So he turned to Brown. "You know why I call you freak?" he said. Brown looked over as they lowered the boat and lifted it again like creaky robots running on reserve power. "Because you are one of the baddest men I've ever seen in my life." Brown cracked a smile. "And you know what I say to these instructors right here?" David tipped his elbow toward the 9 instructors gathered on the beach, drinking coffee. "I say they can go to hell. Now let's throw this boat up high and show them who we are." "Let's do it," Brown said. Within seconds, the entire crew had life. They didn't just lift the boat overhead. They threw it up, caught it, tapped the sand and threw it up again. Faster, harder, and every single time, they chanted, "You can't hurt Boat Crew 2." The pain faded, the exhaustion faded. Each rep made them stronger. On the toughest day of the hardest week in the world's toughest training, Boat Crew 2 was moving at lightning speed and making a mockery of Hell Week. The instructors' mouths hung open. Some of them looked away, almost embarrassed. David calls this concept taking souls. And it's not about dominating another person. It's about finding a tactical advantage in the worst possible moment. It's about flipping the script when everything says you should break. You find something, anything, that gives you a sliver of power, and you ride it like a second wind. But Psycho Pete wasn't done with David. Later that night, while the rest of Boat Crew 2 was given a precious hour of sleep in an army tent on the beach, Psycho woke David after just 1 minute and led him back into the surf alone. Private surf torture. One-on-one with his tormentor, David waded into the chest-high water, stretched his arms out again, and started humming that platoon score. Louder this time. Loud enough for that man to hear him over the crash of every wave. That song gave him life. Later in the week, with 48 hours to go, David went to medical for a shot in his wrecked knee. When he came back, the boats were out at sea. Psycho looked at his commanding officer and said, "What are we going to do with him?" The commanding officer, a man David calls SBG, was built like a silverback gorilla. 225 pounds of muscle with zero sympathy. He handed David a life jacket, attached a glow stick to the back of his hat, and said, "Follow me." They ran a mile up the beach. David could barely see the boats through the mist and the waves. Then SBG turned to him. "All right, Goggins, now go swim out and find your boat." An open water swim. In a storm, 1,000 yards offshore, to a boat that had no idea he was coming. David's deepest fear, the water, weaponized at the worst possible moment. But sometimes the unexpected descends like chaos, and without warning, even the bravest have to be ready to take on tasks that seem beyond anything they've prepared for. For David, it came down to one question. How did he want to be remembered? "Roger that," he said, and he sprinted into the surf, strapped with a buoyancy vest, nursing a wounded knee, wearing boots. He couldn't swim properly. He flailed over the white water, swallowed seawater by the gallon, and felt his fear magnify with every stroke. He had no idea that back on the beach, SBG was preparing for a rescue, nervous as hell, watching that tiny glow stick bob on the surface. David made it through the surf zone and swam another half-mile offshore, only to realize he had 6 boats bearing down on him in a 4-foot wind swell. They didn't know he was there. He could barely see them, and they couldn't see his faint light. All he could do was bark into the darkness like a hoarse sea lion. "Boat crew 2! Boat crew 2!" It was a minor miracle that his crew heard him. They wheeled around, and Freak Brown grabbed David with his big hands and hauled him in. David lay back in the middle of the boat, eyes closed, and for the first time all week he was shaking so badly he couldn't hide it. He was so cold his whole body was vibrating. But he was the leader. He tensed every muscle, and his shiver slowed to a stop in real time. "That's how you lead from the front," he said, coughing up salt water. He couldn't keep a straight face for long. Neither could his crew. When the horn finally sounded on Friday afternoon and Hell Week was secured, 30 men were left standing out of a class that started with over 150. Some screamed with joy, others collapsed and thanked God. David pulled Freak Brown in for a hug and high-fived his team. Every other boat crew had lost men, but not Boat Crew 2. They lost no men, and they won every single race. Chapter 5. Armored Mind. David's knee was destroyed. 2 days after Hell Week ended, the swelling still hadn't gone down. He could barely walk, and the doctor wasn't saying much, because in BODAS there was an unspoken agreement between the medical staff and the candidates. Don't ask, don't tell. David wasn't going to reveal how bad it was, and the doctor wasn't going to pull the ripcord on a man's dream. What David needed was time. Walk Week gave them 7 days to eat, drink, and heal before training kicked back up. Most of the guys who survived Hell Week were battered, but they recovered enough. David didn't. When they took his crutches away, his knee was still wrecked, but there was no time for self-pity, because the next evolution waiting for him was one he never expected could break him: knot tying. At the bottom of a pool. Now that doesn't sound like much, but this wasn't the Boy Scouts. This was an underwater drill in the 15-foot section of the pool. 8 students strung out across the deep end, treading water, fully aware that if they failed this evolution, they were out of BUDS for good. And treading water was David's weakness. On 2 good legs, it was hard enough. With a knee that didn't bend, he had to tread with just 1 leg. His heart rate spiked. His energy drained twice as fast as everyone else. And of course, the instructor assigned to him for this drill was Psycho Pete, the man who'd been trying to break David for weeks. "Tie a square knot, then a bowline," Psycho shouted. David gulped air, bent from the waist, and kicked down to the bottom. There were 5 knots in total. Each had to be tied at the bottom of the pool, approved by the instructor with a thumbs up, before you could surface. If you came up before your knot was approved, you failed. If you failed, you went home. David knocked out the first 2 knots. Psycho took his sweet time examining each one while David's chest burned and his diaphragm contracted, trying to force air into lungs that were nearly empty. Stars gathered in his peripheral vision. He was on the edge of blacking out. When they surfaced, David was gasping and panting. Sweat was beading on his forehead, and when you're sweating in an unheated pool, you know something is seriously wrong. That's when Psycho looked at him with a smirk. "I bet you can't do the last 3 knots on 1 breath." David didn't have to accept the challenge. The rules didn't require it. But refusing would have made Psycho just a little too happy, and David could not allow that. He nodded. He tried to catch his breath before the dive, but every time he opened his mouth, Psycho splashed water in his face, a tactic they used on candidates who were starting to panic. David couldn't get a clean breath. "Go under now or you fail." David dove on a negative breath hold. His lungs were damn near empty from the jump. He tied the first knot in seconds. Psycho examined it with agonizing slowness, turning the rope over in his fingers, while David's heart hammered Morse code against his ribs. Thumbs up. David untied it and hit the next one. Another glacial inspection. His chest was on fire. His diaphragm was trying to rip air into lungs that had nothing to give. The stars were closing in. The wizard, as the instructors called a blackout, was creeping close. And David's mind started to spin with those toxic questions that never go away. Why am I here? Why suffer when I could quit and be comfortable again? Why risk passing out or even death for a knot drill? David looked over at Psycho Pete through the murky water, and what he saw changed everything. Psycho was holding both thumbs up with a big goofy smile on his face. He was enjoying this. David's pain was entertainment, and in that split second of seeing pleasure in another man's eyes at his suffering, something snapped, not in the way you'd expect. David didn't get angry. He didn't fight harder out of rage. Instead, for the first time, he stopped seeing himself as a victim. Time stood still as a realization washed over him. His entire life, every bit of pain he'd endured, every beating, every humiliation, every failure, he'd been looking at it all from the wrong angle. Yes, the abuse was real. The racism was real. The poverty and the trauma were real. But in that moment, at the bottom of that pool, David stopped seeing his past as a curse. He started seeing it as training. Think about it this way. When you first start lifting weights, your hands are soft. They tear up on the bar almost immediately. But over time, after thousands of reps, your palms build up thick calluses as protection. The same thing happens with your mind. Until you experience hardship, failure, pain, and abuse, your mind stays soft and exposed. But those experiences, especially the worst ones, they callous you. They thicken the walls. The question is, what do you do with that callus? If you choose to see yourself as a victim, that callus turns into resentment. It makes you fearful of change, untrusting, angry at the world, hard on the outside, but brittle underneath. But if you stay open, if you keep fighting, if you use that pain as fuel instead of letting it shut you down, the callus becomes armor. Real armor, the kind that lets you absorb hit after hit and keep moving forward. David calls this the calloused mind. And standing at the bottom of that pool, on the edge of a blackout, he realized he'd been building one his entire life without knowing it. He smiled at Psycho Pete through the water, and the feeling of being on the edge of unconsciousness went away. Suddenly, he was energized. The pain faded. He felt like he could stay under all day. Psycho saw it in his eyes. David tied the last knot at a leisurely pace, glaring at Psycho the whole time. Psycho gestured for him to hurry up because his own diaphragm was contracting. David finished, got the thumbs up, and Psycho kicked to the surface, desperate for air. David took his time, joined him topside, and found Psycho gasping while David felt strangely relaxed. He'd won a major battle in the water, the element that had terrified him since childhood, that had beaten him out of pararescue, that had haunted him every single night before a pool evolution. And the reason he won was not raw talent or physical ability. It was because he'd put in the work. For months he'd been sneaking into the pool after hours, scaling the 15-foot fence just to get extra practice. He dedicated so much time to his greatest weakness that when the pressure peaked, his calloused mind took over. But the war wasn't over. After the knot-tying drill, the class was given 2 minutes to get dressed and head back to the classroom. The guys who'd survived Hell Week had developed an attitude. They weren't afraid of the instructors anymore, and they weren't in a rush. The instructors did not appreciate that. What followed was one of the worst beatdowns in Bud/history. Push-ups until nobody could pick themselves up. Flutter kicks that sent shockwaves through David's destroyed knee. Bear crawls where he could feel the moving parts of his kneecaps shifting and floating with every step. And then something extraordinary happened. A feeling washed over David in the middle of the worst pain of his life. His victory in the pool came rushing back. He'd proved he belonged in the water. He'd conquered his deepest fear through dedication and work. And remembering that, feeling that win again in real time, unlocked something. He started moving faster. The pain didn't disappear, but it receded. He was doing bear crawls around that pool at a pace that made no sense for a man with a broken body. The instructors watched, stunned. When it was over, the commanding officer looked at David and asked, "What got into your ass to make you Superman?" David just smiled and walked away, because he didn't fully understand it yet himself. But what he'd stumbled onto was something powerful. When you're in the worst moment of your life, drowning in pain and self-doubt, if you can reach back and remember what you've already overcome, if you can tap into the emotional state of a past victory, it shifts your entire nervous system. Your calloused mind becomes a weapon. Not by ignoring pain, not by pretending everything is fine, but by reminding yourself of the truth, that you've been through worse, that you survived, that you are harder than you think. And when you do that, your body follows your mind into places you didn't know were possible. But no matter how calloused your mind is, it can't heal broken bones. On the hike back to the BODACH compound, the truth caught up with David. He could feel the damage. An X-ray confirmed what he already knew: fractured kneecap. In Bud/, when reservists sustain injuries that take a long time to heal, they're sent home. David crutched his way back to the barracks, demoralized, and while checking out, he passed the helmets of the men who'd quit. A long line of them stretched across the grinder beneath the bell. He read some of the names. Guys he'd liked, guys he understood. He knew the empty feeling of giving up. He'd been there in pararescue, but this time he hadn't quit. He'd be invited back. The question was whether he had it in him to do this a third time. David took the train from San Diego to Chicago. 3 days of nothing but his own thoughts. On day 1, he didn't know if he wanted to be a SEAL anymore. On day 2, he considered other careers, maybe a firefighter. On day 3, he slipped into a bathroom the size of a phone booth and checked in with the accountability mirror. "I'm afraid," he said to his reflection. "I'm afraid of going through all of that again. I'm afraid of day 1, week 1. That summer, while healing in the Midwest, David's ex-wife Pam showed up with news. She was pregnant. Suddenly, the stakes were higher than ever. If he failed this time, he wouldn't just be failing himself. He'd be bringing his family down with him. That night, on his mother's couch, the dam broke. David put his head in his hands and sobbed. "Mom, my life from the time I was born until now has been a nightmare. A nightmare that keeps getting worse. The harder I try, the harder my life becomes." His mother didn't baby him. "I can't argue with that, David," she said, "but I also know you well enough to know that you will find a way to get through this." David sat on that couch all night. And for the first time, he went back through his past not to escape it, not to use it as fuel, but to face it. He'd been running from his father his entire life. He told people Toughness was dead rather than admit the truth of where he came from. Because when you get beaten down as a child, you don't want to acknowledge it. It doesn't make you feel strong. So the easiest thing is to pretend it never happened. Not anymore. That night, David accepted that his father was part of him, that the lying, the cheating, the violence, all of it had shaped who he was. And instead of rejecting that, he chose to use it, because once he accepted his past, it became fuel instead of poison. Every episode of abuse that could have killed him had actually made him tougher. Every humiliation had sharpened his edge. He started thinking of his life as running a 100-mile race with a 50-pound weight on his back. Could he still compete? And how fast would he be once he shed that dead weight? David showed up to Bud/Class 235 on a mission. 156 men on day 1. His knee was still sore, but this was his last chance. The Navy had told him clearly, if he got injured again, they would never let him come back. This Hell Week was the worst of the 3. It rained all day and all night. Instead of hot meals, they were given cold field rations for almost every meal. There was absolutely no relief, and during the week, a classmate named John Scope collapsed in the pool during a caterpillar swim. He'd been sick from the start. His lungs had been filling with fluid. He sank to the bottom and had to be pulled out by 2 instructors. Scope didn't make it. He died that night. The commanding officer walked into the classroom and delivered the news cold. "Mr. Scope is dead. This is the world you live in. He's not the first, and he won't be the last." Hell Week was called 36 hours early. There was no pizza ceremony, no celebration on the grinder. 25 men survived out of 156. David was one of them, and once again his body was shattered. Both shins were slivered with small fractures. His knee was barely functional, but Walk Week lasted only 48 hours this time. The instructors were angry that Hell Week ended early, and they cut recovery short. David had 21 more weeks of training in front of him, and he could barely walk, let alone run the 60 miles a week that BODAD/demanded. So the night before training kicked back up, David went to the BOD/equipment cage at 3:30 in the morning. He sat in the dark. He could hear the rolling surf in the distance, and he dug 2 rolls of duct tape out of his dive bag. Carefully, he pulled a thick black sock over his right foot. The shin was tender to the touch. Any twitch of the ankle registered high on the pain scale. He looped tape around his heel, up over his ankle, back down, then moved up his calf until his entire lower leg was wrapped tight. Then he added a second sock and a second layer of tape. 2 sock layers, 2 tape layers. He laced up his boot, and his ankle was immobilized inside a makeshift soft cast. He did the same to his left leg, and an hour later, both lower legs were sealed up and protected. It still hurt to walk, but it was more tolerable. The real test would come when they started running. That first training run was a trial by fire. David had to generate all his power from his hip flexors instead of his feet and lower legs. For the first 30 minutes, the pain was the worst he'd ever felt. The tape cut into his skin. The pounding sent shockwaves up his fractured shins, and every thought in his head told him to stop. The only way to guarantee failure is to quit right now, he said to himself. Take the pain, or it won't just be your failure. It will be your family's failure. He imagined the feeling he would have if he could actually pull this off. Running on broken legs through 5 more months of SEAL training. That bought him another half mile. More pain rained down. People have a hard time going through BUDEDS healthy, and you're going through it on broken legs. Who else would even think of this? Only Goggins. Each step you run from now until the end will only make you harder. And at the 40-minute mark, something remarkable happened. The pain receded, the tape loosened, his muscles warmed up, and while the pain came and went through the rest of the day, it became manageable. Day after day, the same ritual played out. Arrive early, duct tape the feet, endure 30 minutes of extreme pain, talk himself through it, survive. He passed drown-proofing with his hands and feet bound, dolphin kicking across the pool while sinking like a stone. He passed a brutal loaded swim where they had to stay on the surface wearing twin 80-pound tanks and a 16-pound weight belt, and several men sank and quit on the spot. David passed on his 3rd and final attempt, using long, fluid scissor kicks powered by those overworked hip flexors. By the time they reached 3rd phase, land warfare training on San Clemente Island, David's legs had healed, and the instructors had noticed something. During beatdowns, David wasn't suffering like everyone else. He was smiling. He was enjoying it. He'd become so hard that the punishment designed to break men was something he looked forward to. One afternoon, during a classic beatdown, an instructor walked over to David mid-push-up. "Goggins, get up. You like this too much." David laughed and kept going. The instructor was serious. "I said get up. You're getting way too much pleasure." David stood up, stepped to the side, and watched his classmates suffer for the next 30 minutes without him. From that point on, the instructors stopped including him in their beatdowns. When the class was ordered to do push-ups, they'd exclude David. He'd finally broken the will of the entire BADESCA staff. Graduation was held on the grinder. Families flew in. Mothers and wives were done up gorgeous. The graduates of Class 235 mustered in their dress whites beneath a huge American flag. To their right was the bell that 130 of their classmates had rung on the way out. David's mother had tears of joy in her eyes when his name was called. But strangely, David didn't feel much of anything except sadness. He was sorry to see Bud/Go. When he first locked in on the SEALs, he was looking for an arena that would either destroy him completely or make him unbreakable. Bud/ had given him that. It showed him what the human mind is capable of when it's driven to maximum capacity, running on broken legs, outlasting the men who were supposed to break him, conquering a fear of water that had haunted him since childhood. David Goggins became just the 36th African American to graduate Bud/ in Navy SEAL history. 9 months earlier, he couldn't run a quarter mile. He weighed nearly 300 pounds. He was spraying cockroach poison in restaurant kitchens at 2 in the morning and eating chocolate milkshakes for breakfast. Now he was a Navy SEAL. But if you think that's where this story peaks, you don't know David Goggins. Because as he looked out at that ocean on graduation day, one thought echoed in his mind that would define everything that came next. There is no finish line. There is no finish line. Before we wrap up part 1, let's talk about what David Goggins wants you to actually do with everything you just heard. Because this book isn't just a memoir. At the end of every chapter, Goggins issues a direct challenge. Not a suggestion, not a gentle nudge, a challenge. And if you're serious about applying anything from this story to your own life, these are the assignments he wants you to complete. Challenge number 1. Take inventory of your bad hand. Goggins showed you every piece of his dirty laundry. The abuse, the poverty, the racism, the failures. He didn't hide a thing, and now he's asking you to do the same. Pull out a journal, a notebook, or the Notes app on your phone and write down every limiting factor in your life. The bullying, the insecurity, the trauma, the ways you've been held back, or the ways you've held yourself back. Don't be vague, be specific. Give your pain shape, because you are about to use that list as fuel. Challenge number 2. The accountability mirror. Go find a mirror and write sticky notes of your insecurities, your goals, and the honest truth about where you stand right now. Not affirmations, not feel-good quotes, the raw truth. If you need more education, write that you need to start working because you aren't smart enough. If you're overweight, write that down in plain language. Then write the specific steps it will take to change each one of those things. This isn't about self-love. It's about self-honesty. And every time you accomplish one of those goals, you take that note down and put up the next one. Challenge number 3. Step outside your comfort zone. Every single day. Goggins isn't asking you to lose 100 pounds in 3 months or sign up for SEAL training. He's asking you to do something that sucks every day. Something small. Make your bed, do the dishes, wake up before dawn, and run 2 miles. Once that becomes comfortable, push it to 5, then 10. Find the things you've been avoiding, the tasks that make your skin crawl, and run straight at them. The more often you get uncomfortable, the stronger you become, and soon you'll develop a completely different dialogue with yourself when life gets hard. Challenge number 4. Take someone's soul through excellence. Pick a competitive situation in your life right now. A teacher who underestimates you, a boss who overlooks you, a coach who won't give you playing time. Whatever it is, your job is to show up and perform at a level so high that it's undeniable. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of excellence. Dominate practice. Write papers they didn't assign. Arrive before them and leave after. Make them watch you achieve what they never thought you could. Take their soul. And challenge number 5. Visualize. Before you take on any challenge, any goal, any obstacle, paint a picture in your mind of what success looks and feels like. But don't stop there. Visualize the pain that's coming too. Visualize the doubt. Visualize the moment when your body begs you to quit. And plan your response in advance. Because if you wait until that moment to figure out your answer, you'll choose the one that makes it stop. Have your answer ready before the question arrives. Know why you're in the fight so you can stay in it. Those are the first 5 challenges. And here's the thread that connects all of them. None of this is about motivation. Motivation fades, it's temporary. What Goggins is building, challenge by challenge, is something permanent. A calloused mind, a mindset so thick and so hard that when life comes at you with everything it has, you don't just survive, you smile, and you ask for more. Let me ask you something. Right now, after everything you've heard, what's your excuse? David Goggins was abused as a child, beaten by his father with a belt buckle, raised in poverty, called the worst names you can imagine by people who didn't even know him. He couldn't read, he couldn't swim, he was nearly 300 pounds and spraying cockroach poison for a living. Every system he touched failed him, and every person who should have protected him didn't, and he became a Navy SEAL. He ran on broken legs. He survived 3 hell weeks in a single year. He conquered fears that would have buried most people alive. But here's what makes his story different from every other success story you've ever heard. He didn't do it because he was gifted. He didn't do it because someone believed in him. He didn't even do it because he believed in himself. He did it because he refused to quit, because he looked in that dirty bathroom mirror and told himself the truth when nobody else would. And then he went to work. That's part 1 of Can't Hurt Me, the origin story, the forging. But part 1 is only the beginning. Because in part 2, David Goggins takes everything he built in BUDSEAs and applies it to challenges that make Hell Week look like a warm-up. He runs 100 miles with 0 training. He competes in the hottest, most punishing ultramarathon on Earth. He tries to break a world record for pull-ups on national television, fails in front of millions, and comes back to try again, twice. He discovers he was born with a hole in his heart, which means everything he accomplished, every race, every Hell Week, he did it on half the oxygen supply of a normal human being. And through it all, he develops the philosophy that ties everything together. The cookie jar, the 40% rule, the belief that you are leaving more on the table than you ever imagined, and the tools to go get it. Part 2 is on the channel now. I'll see you there. And if this story moved you, if it made you think even for a second about your own limits and what might be hiding on the other side of them, I'd encourage you to pick up a copy of Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. The link is in the description, and your purchase supports both the author and this channel. Now take a moment. Reflect on what you heard today. The power to change your story is in your hands. Choose wisely,